I have always found that the most strident atheists are often the people who are thinking actually very deeply about the big questions. They recognize the significance of the questions. I think indifference is much harder to get through to. If somebody just doesn't even care about the question, you've got a problem. But I have found, and this was certainly the case for me, it's not that I wasn't interested in these questions. I was always actually interested in religion as a historical phenomenon and as a psychological phenomenon. I thought it was crazy that people would believe these things, but I thought it was very interesting that they did. And so I enjoyed getting into discussions about the meaning of life and ultimate purpose and all of this. So I have found that atheists very, very often have that deep hunger, that desire to know. They're not convinced by whatever has been presented to them as the answer, but more often than not, frankly, those answers have been less than satisfactory, and I can understand why they've rejected them. So it's an important thing to be able to understand that that they want to know too. They want to be happy too. You know, they want to know what it means to live a fulfilled life and things like that. And there's a tremendous foundation in that for a common conversation that can go any number of directions. I think my reaction against what I perceived as Christianity and my rejection of religious people in general had to do with what I perceived as a desire to restrict the way I wanted to live. It was really about the choices that I was making, you know, in my relationships with girlfriends or playing the band or whatever it was. I wanted to be able to keep living the way I was living and doing the things that I was doing without anybody telling me that it was wrong or contrary or whatever. And that also made it more difficult when I was coming back into the church to be able to let that go and understand that there is a real freedom in what the church is proposing. It's not a restriction of my freedom. It's a releasing of it. So I don't know that there's a lot that somebody could have said to convince me when I was younger, at least when I was not interested in the questions and not really engaged in the questions. But as I got older and started to get into it with people, there were occasionally some people who would propose a question. But I honestly, I didn't meet a lot of really informed Christians along that path. The first time I really did was when I went to Scotland, and I was living in a graduate dorm of students from all over the world studying all kinds of fields, and there were two people there who were both practicing Christians, serious Christians, not Catholics, who sort of shattered my stereotype. Because I had been thinking, when I thought Christianity, I thought Ned Flanders, you know, from The Simpsons. That was my cartoon cutout. But here I met a guy from Nigeria who was a medical doctor, and he was doing a doctorate in divinity. And his research was focused on ways to bridge the gap between spirituality and medicine. And I met a young woman from Australia who was studying philosophy, doing a doctorate in philosophy. Both were very intelligent people, very articulate, and they were both faithful Christians. So that, even though we didn't really talk about faith all that much initially, it shattered my stereotype right away. And I said, well, that's been convenient for me to lump that image, throw that image around, but it's not standing up to what I'm actually meeting in these people. That was really an overwhelming experience, to really dip my toe into the water of the intellectual tradition of the faith. It was not something that had been alien to me because, I mean, my father, all of his life, had read the same types of books. He would, from time to time, especially when I was in college, recommend that I read this or that to sort of balance out the view that I was getting in some of my classes in history or philosophy or whatever. But I never did, of course, because I wasn't interested in something that he would recommend. But when it came time for me to start doing that reading, whose books was I pulling off the shelf? My father's. And so then he and I really had a common language that we could engage in, and that was very helpful. But yeah, it was overwhelming to find the depth of the intellectual tradition of the faith. It really knocked me off my feet. And as I say, night after night, I would drop whatever book I was reading in my lap and say, this makes perfect sense, which I never expected, you know, that this would be rational. Wow. But the harder part was engaging my will to actually take the next step toward faith and say that I believe this. It makes sense, but I got to get to that next step. And really, another factor there is, much to my surprise, after I came back to the church, Father Kelly suggested that I might have a call to the priesthood, which I laughed him out of the room. Initially, I just said, I'm flattered, but you are out of your mind. Well, eventually, he and a couple of others suggested that I take some time and go spend them with religious communities. So I did. I spent 5 months visiting monasteries, especially around the country. And it was there that all of this really moved from head to heart in a very, very powerful way. To be able to work through all of my past and everything that I was learning, to see what I had been and everything I was now and everything I wanted to be, that all had to be done in the school of silence for me. The power of the cloister and the conversations I was able to have with monks who had been living that life for decades was indescribably powerful in my journey. And that's what really brought it all together for me in a spirit of prayer. It was like going out into the desert for the first time to meet God face to face, so that you can find out not only who you are, but who you want to be, who you have always wanted to be, and to learn how to pray, what that means. It's a very powerful time.